All right. The book of Jeremiah, it's one of those books that kind of gets neglected. One of the major prophets, you kind of cruise through it when you're reading through the Bible, but you don't really spend a lot of time. But there's a lot of good stuff in this book, which has made preparing for the class difficult because, and I'm always all over the place. But I kind of settled down into trying to go pull things out in kind of a chronological order so that you can kind of see the pieces as the flow and see how his message changes throughout the years. And we're going to continue that today. The last couple of weeks, we've been looking at his lifetime during the reign of King Jehoiakim. And we saw things starting to do that downward spiral in Jehoiakim's reign. And hopefully remember the 4th year of Jehoiakim's reign. That was an important year. The first 4 years, he's been paying tribute to Egypt. Except in the 4th year, there's a big battle between Babylon and Egypt, and Babylon beats Egypt and sends Egypt back. The first few captives get taken off to Babylon, including Daniel. Not a big exodus of captives at this time, but there's a change of guard. And now Jehoiakim finds himself in the place where he's making tribute instead of the king of Egypt, now to the king of Babylon. And he does this for 3 years. And then he decides, you know what, I've had enough of this. I'm not paying the king of Babylon anymore. Of course, the king has gone back off up to Babylon. Jehoiakim is getting attacked by raiders. As God's sending him, God's trying to wake him up. There's famine in the land. Things aren't going good in his reign. And he finally says, you know what, I'm not paying anymore. So let's start off in 2 Kings chapter 24, and we're going to read verses 1 through 3. In his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant for 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him. The Lord sent against him bands of Chaldeans, bands of Arameans, bands of Moabites, and bands of Ammonites. So he sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord which he had spoken through his servants the prophets. Surely at the command of the Lord it came upon Judah to remove them from his sight because of the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he had done. And so in this passage we see Jehoiakim manages to pay 3 years of tribute. He's had enough, and so he stops paying tribute. And of course, what's going to happen with the king in Babylon? He's not going to be particularly pleased about that deal. You know, Jehoiakim's in this position. He's told, you know, you're now under our umbrella. This is what you're going to pay to us. And by not paying it, Jehoiakim is rebelling, saying, no, I'm rebelling against you, king of Babylon. Of course, this now leads us to this timeline, which gets us to the king Zedekiah. And we're going to spend a few weeks looking the same thing as we did with Jehoiakim. First off, we're going to look at the history and kind of the timeline, what's going on in the events. And then we're going to start looking at some of the sermons that Jeremiah gave during this time frame and what Jeremiah is going through during this time frame. And of course, we know the end of the story. It'd be kind of nice if we didn't know the story. We could let this build up to the climax, you know, and it might help us if we just at sometimes just forget that we know the end of the story and go, what is the people really thinking about here? As they hear Jeremiah giving this message and they hear the false prophets giving this message, and you don't know the end of the story. What's going through your mind if you're in that situation? You're going to listen to Jeremiah, or are you going to listen to these other prophets who are saying that they're getting a message from God as well? And which ones are you going to listen to? All right, so what has happened in the kingdom during this time of Jehoiakim? They're getting pillaged, attacked, beat up. And so we're kind of seeing that downward spiral happening, aren't we? Josiah was before Jehoiakim, and they were an independent country through the life of Josiah. And of course, Josiah made these reforms. But after that period, Jehoiakim comes in, and he's under servitude for his entire reign. And we see kind of this downward spiral beginning. And so when Zedekiah becomes king, he's inheriting a mess. And we're going to see that. So let's continue reading in 2 Kings, and we're going to read verses 8 through 17 of chapter 24. Whoops, I should stick with this one because that's a different translation. I'll group them up. Jehoiakim was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. His mother's name was Nehushta, name I can't pronounce, daughter of Elnathan. She was from Jerusalem. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father had done. At that time, the officers of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, advanced on Jerusalem and laid siege to it. Nebuchadnezzar himself came up to the city while his officers were besieging it. Jehoiachin, king of Judah, his mother, his attendants, his nobles, and his officials all surrendered to him. In the 8th year of the reign of the king of Babylon, he took Jehoiachin prisoner, as the Lord had declared. Nebuchadnezzar removed the treasures from the temple of the Lord and from the royal palace, and cut up the gold articles that Solomon, king of Israel, had made for the temple of the Lord. He carried all Jerusalem into exile. All the officers and fighting men and all the skilled workers and artisans, a total of 10,000. Only the poorest people of the land were left. Nebuchadnezzar took Jehoiachin captive to Babylon. He also took from Jerusalem to Babylon the king's mother, his wives, his officials, and the prominent people of the land. The king of Babylon also deported to Babylon the entire force of 7,000 fighting men, strong and fit for war, and 1,000 skilled workers and artisans. He made Mattaniah, Jehoiachin's uncle, king in his place, and changed his name to Zedekiah. Okay, so what changes are happening after Jehoiakim's death? Yeah, he took all the good stuff. Nebuchadnezzar's mad. You've revolted against me and you've held back 3 years worth of payment. Well, here's payment. I'm coming and I'm taking it. And he does. And he goes into the temple. He takes the gold articles, all these things that we read about years before, with God giving these special skill sets to these craftsmen that are making these beautiful objects for his temple of worship. And the heavy pieces, cutting them up into hunks so they can haul them out. All that beautiful work going. And so, obviously, things aren't going to go too terribly well. So who's left in the land? The poor people. All right, so what you have is the poor people left in the land How'd you like to be king now? The advisors that you relied upon in your father's kingdom, where are they? Where's your military? Gone. And so Zedekiah gets put in a tough spot. And Zedekiah would be Josiah's third son. This is kind of interesting. So 3 of Josiah's sons all make it to the throne. Obviously Jehoiakim puts his son Jehoiachin on the throne and lasts for 3 months. And what does this story remind you of? There was a story just a little while ago that's incredibly similar to this one, except dealing with Egypt. Is Jehoiakim actually his name? No. That was Josiah's oldest son. And if you remember, when Egypt came, Josiah's middle son was on the throne. He reigned for 3 months. He was taken captive by Egypt, hauled to Egypt, never to return. And Jehoiakim, Josiah's oldest son, was then put on the throne. And of course, that wasn't his name. The king of Egypt gave him that name and put him on the throne. And now we have the same scenario happening again. So now we have Jehoiakim, I'm not going to keep these names straight, Jehoiakim on the throne. He dies, he places his son on the throne. Lasts 3 months. I think his dad picked the right time to die. Because Babylon wasn't happy. And I assume if he was still alive, he probably would have lost his life by the king of Babylon. It doesn't really say how he lost his life, but it sounds like he died before Babylon got there to lay siege on the town. But, so here you have him. He gets hauled off to Babylon, never to return. The king of Babylon now selects Josiah's youngest son and puts him on the throne and renames him. So kind of very interesting, the similarities between those two. I don't know if it makes much difference besides that I find it interesting, but kind of that same exact scenario happens. And now you got another person placed upon the throne by the direction of a foreign power. And when we think about this, if Jehoiakim was king for 11 years, and when Zedekiah becomes king, he's 21. That would make him around 10-ish years old when his daddy Josiah died. So he was a young lad when his dad passed on. And now he's getting thrust in to kingship in a horrible situation. I mean, you can look at it as a horrible situation and everything's against me, or you can look at it, there's no way but up. Let's make the best of it. The only thing I can do is make effective change for the good. But we'll see if Zedekiah does that. I already see people know the story and their heads are shaking. Let's see. One line left on this sheet. And I'm going, hold it, this doesn't make any sense. Now, let's continue this story, but let's do it from the other account of this in 2 Chronicles chapter 36. And we'll start in verse 11. 2 Chronicles 36, starting in verse 11. All right, Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 11 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord his God and did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet, who spoke the word of the Lord. He also rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, who had made him take an oath in God's name. He became stiff-necked and hardened his heart, and would not turn to the Lord, the God of Israel. Furthermore, all the leaders of the priests and the people became more and more unfaithful, following all the detestable practices of the nations and defiling the temple of the Lord, which he had consecrated in Jerusalem. The Lord, the God of their ancestors, sent word to them through his messengers again and again, because he had pity on his people and on his dwelling place. But they mocked God's messengers, despised his words, and scoffed at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord was aroused against his people, and there was no remedy. Ouch. So what type of king was King Zedekiah? Not good. What are some of the things that are listed in here? Stiff-necked, hard-hearted, evil. He wouldn't humble himself. And I think it's interesting, it specifically says he didn't humble himself to whom? To Jeremiah, which ultimately is God. But it specifically says that, let's hear, that he did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet. And so, he rebelled against the king, and he certainly wasn't going to turn his heart back to the Lord. All right, so during this time frame, what were the leaders and the priests and the people like? Just as bad. They were more and more unfaithful, is what the scripture says, following detestable practices and defiling the temple. And so the leadership structure, from the king down to the leaders, the priests, and the people, are all on this downward spiral. So, leads us to the obvious question, what's life going to be like for Jeremiah for the next 11 years? Have to think about that one pretty hard, don't you? Things are not going to go good. And remember, we said after Josiah, what's Jeremiah's life going to be? Oh, it's going to be hard. So now we're 11 years later. What's life going to be like for Jeremiah? Oh boy, it's going to be even harder. You got to realize that Jeremiah at this time has been in ministry from his calling for close to 30 years. He's now around a 50-year-old man. And so this next 11 years is going to be roughly 50 to 61-ish. Age of a lot of us in here. How'd you like to have this task after your first 30 years? I'm sure. All this without the comfort of family. No wife, no kids. And of course, we know that his family is against him. You see that persecution in there. So he has virtually nobody besides who? God. And so here he is. He's near 50. I assume he's probably grayed and he probably looks older than his years because he's had a hard life. And he's a tired and wore out man of God, and God isn't finished with him yet. Jeremiah, you still have a ministry to give. And so this is kind of the timeline that I have. In 597, King Nebuchadnezzar comes and he besieges Jerusalem. And then, of course, we go through that. Zedekiah is put on the throne, and he begins his 11-year reign. And around 594, Zedekiah, although he's made an oath to the king of Babylon to serve him, he starts devising his plans of rebellion. And he's going to the other nations, and we'll look at that closer in some of the sermons that Jeremiah gives to the king during this time frame. And the king of Babylon gets wind of it. And he calls for not for Jeremiah, he calls for Zedekiah. Zedekiah is taken to Babylon, and the king inquires of him and sends him back. And then when we get to 589, Pharaoh offers help. Says, you know what? Nations, if you guys go, we got your back. Which kind of gives Zedekiah the green light. And, of course, they do. 1 year later, guess who's coming down from Babylon? We aren't going to put up with this. There isn't going to be any of this revolting going on around here. And so Babylon comes down, marches, and the siege of Jerusalem begins in 588. And the next 2.5 years are torturous years in Jerusalem. The only good thing is in 587, Egypt marches. They come to fulfill their promise. Babylon has to retreat from Jerusalem a little bit, and this is where Jeremiah gets sent off. God tells him to go out and buy a piece of property, and he goes out to try and make the deal. The people think that he's trying to escape to the enemy, and they arrest him, and we got the prison, we get the throwing in the well. All of that stuff is happening in this 587 time period, and we'll look at some of those stories as we go through. But that doesn't last long. It doesn't take Babylon long to take care of Egypt, and they're back. And then by 586, there's no food in Jerusalem. The people are starving. Babylon, and I didn't finish my through. But Babylon breaks through the wall into Jerusalem. Jerusalem is captured. The people are hauled off to captivity. Everything is torn down in the temple, all the bronze and everything else, and then they come and they burn the city to the ground. And sad time. So it's going to be rough, a rough 11 years for Jeremiah the prophet. Okay. Actually, I'm flipping this to the back. Let's get into the first object lesson. During the reign of King Zedekiah, this would be one of the first things recorded in Zedekiah's reign in the book of Jeremiah. So turn with me now to Jeremiah chapter 24. Jeremiah 24. We'll start in verse 1. After Jehoiachin, son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and the officials, the skilled workers, and the artisans of Judah were carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the Lord showed me 2 baskets of figs placed in front of the temple of the Lord. One basket had very good figs, like those that ripen early. The other basket had very bad figs, so bad they could not be eaten. Then the Lord asked me, "What do you see, Jeremiah?" "Figs," I answered. "The good ones are very good, but the bad ones are so bad they cannot be eaten." Then the word of the Lord came to me. "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Like these good figs, I regard as good the exiles from Judah, whom I sent away from this place to the land of the Babylonians. My eyes will watch over them for their good, and I will bring them back to this land, and I will build them up and not tear them down. I will plant them and not uproot them. I will give them a heart to know me, that I am the Lord. They will be my people, and I will be their God. for they will return to me with all their heart. But like the bad figs, which are so bad they cannot be eaten, says the Lord, so will I deal with Zedekiah, king of Judah, his officials, and the survivors from Jerusalem, whether they remain in this land or live in Egypt. I will make them abhorrent and an offense to all the kingdoms of the earth, a reproach and a byword, a curse, and an object of ridicule. Wherever I banish them, I will send the sword, famine, and plague against them until they are destroyed from the land I gave to them and their ancestors. Okay, so we get an object lesson here. So what do these two baskets of figs represent? Let's go with the good basket. What does the good basket represent? All right, they're the Israelites that have been taken off into captivity. Now, if you were sent in this second wave of captives to Babylon, what would you be thinking at this time? Yeah. It'd be woe with me, right? Total uncertainty. You think you'd have some sleepless nights? I mean, it's an 800-mile trek from Jerusalem to Babylon. And here you are, walking along, a captive. Do you know if you're even going to live tomorrow or not? Now, what would you be thinking if you had been ignoring Jeremiah's message for all this time? Oops. I think I've been listening to the wrong prophet. And he's been talking some doom and gloom, which also makes you think, this is happening. This isn't going to be good. But what's God's perspective? This is interesting. Yeah. He's removing them from a bad situation. And what's the whole purpose of God doing this? To build them back up. All right. How about Jaron today? Jaron, have you ever done something wrong and gotten a spanking? Why did Dad give you a spanking? To be able to not do it. Exactly. And that's God's perspective. This is God's spanking stick. And God has a spanking stick, doesn't he? But he's not doing it to be mean. He's not doing it to be vengeful, although he has every right to be. He's doing it because he loves them. And he's doing it because they need taken away from that situation. They need humbled. Why? That they'll come back to him. Yeah, he's also preserving that line. And really, when we read through this, I plan to bring them back to land, good, plant them, not tear them down. And we have this. This is really kind of prophetic, even looking past them coming back to Jerusalem, to Jesus Christ coming, and that ultimate sacrifice, isn't it? He's preserving that lineage and that line. Dan? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I don't know how long it takes to move 10,000 people plus an army 800 miles, but that has to take a while. Yeah, plenty of time to think as you're sitting there walking down this dusty old road on your way to Babylon. You know, and yeah, that message has been sitting in their minds, and I'm sure they're thinking, they're going, boy, that Jeremiah, you know what? I think he was God's prophet. Maybe I should listen to him a little bit more, but now it's too late. And they have that time, they have that going through their mind and what they've done. And of course, now what happens to your pride? I think captivity takes your pride away pretty quickly, doesn't it? And that, Jeremiah's failure was really a success. And I think for those who are in ministry in particular, I'm sure it's for all of us, we can take comfort in that. You know, I know many people, well, even you, Dad, banging up on doors and trying to teach people, and it doesn't seem like you get any fruit out of it. And you start feeling like, what is this even worth? But you don't know what the fruit is. You don't know what that long term. Every now and then, God gives you a little glimpse, but for the most part, you don't see what the fruit is. And we just continue to go on and to teach. And so, really, within this, we have one event that takes place, and we have two different outcomes, don't we? The one is that we can be good fruit, which means that during adversity, we have a willingness to believe that good's going to come out of it. For I'll set my eyes on them for good, and will bring them back to this land. I will build them up. And so, when we go through these times, it's important for us to take that long look and realize that what God is doing, even though this feels harsh and feels horrible, God is meaning it for us for our good. And that good will come about it. And secondly, from adversity, we can have a teachable heart. I will give them a heart to know me, that I am the Lord. And so, despite of the disaster and the suffering that they're going through, God's going to break through that hard, calloused heart of theirs, their pride, and take it wholly away and humble them to where they can see what's really happening. That really God is making them suffer for their redemption. And then finally, there's a higher form of obedience in here, isn't there? And they shall be my people, and I will be their God, for they shall return to me with their whole heart. And so, really, we have two choices. When we go through these trials, we can harden our heart and be some stinky, rotten old figs that's worthless to God, or we can humble ourselves and learn the lessons and return to God with all of our hearts and be fantastic, good fruit. And I think it's important for us to notice here as we wrap this up that there's no third basket, right? There isn't any middle of the road figs here. You're either going to be good or you're going to be rotten. Either way, we're going to be fruit baskets. But we're going to be one of the two. We're either going to be a bad, rotten fruit basket or we're going to be a gloriously good fruit basket. And so the encouragement today as we start getting into this next phase of Jeremiah's life is to really look at this adversity. When we have these things that come up and we're really hurting, we're questioning God, what fruit basket are you going to be? What fruit basket are you going to be? No middle fruit basket. You're going to be one and learn your lessons, or you're going to be the other and be worthless. And we'll close it up there for today. Thank you guys very much.